So I started the record button. I also opened the chat box. So if you guys want to pop your names in there, so that way I can give you guys put your points in and count for everyone. We'll be good. So it's like everyone's week's basically like I had 8:05 class 6. So I think everyone's week's been about the same. We're coming up on a full moon. I think everyone feel it right now. So I'm going to start my screen share in just a second. I need to pop up a page. Give me a minute. All right, should pop up there. All right, everyone see my screen okay? So I've got the slide deck up for week 5. So it's hard to believe this is week 5 out of 8. So this class it's going quick. So that's kind of the nice thing about the 8-week format. So anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about tonight the evaluation and reeval process, kind of what all that entails. Some of you guys maybe have been in the SPED room long enough, you know. For those of you who are new, this may help answer some questions about the process. So we'll talk a little bit about evaluation, looking at initial. So that's a student initial testing for a student that is not currently received services, and then looking at what goes into the eligibility, and then triennial. Those are often referred to as the 3-year eval that we do, where students eligible for reeval every 3 years. And also independent educational evaluation. We'll talk a little bit about that. So you may run into that in our 805 class that just kind of came up, where a parent brought in basically at open house, meet the teacher night, demanding a meeting right then. They had an independent evaluation that's done over the summer, and they want to have that meeting right then. So we had a bit of discussion on that. So anyway, we're going to talk about the types of evaluation and what all that entails. So we look at basic evaluation. It's a beginning step in special education process for a student with a suspected disability. So we have the initial. That is the very first time that a student is tested to see if they qualify. Okay, so hopefully up to that point, there's been a lot of data collection up to that point, information that's collected to say, yeah, we're looking at this, and there's no doubt we need to proceed forward and do an initial eval. So we have the referral process, a little bit some acronyms there: the GEI, the SIT, whether it's MTSS, which we talked a little bit about that before, and then also parent request. So that's all part of that referral process. Again, you hope you've collected a lot of data up to that point. Reevaluation, triennial, I just mentioned that's every 3 years. We do a reeval, okay? That's mutual consent between the parent and the school. So that's what that entails. So basically, the student's been receiving services. They're coming up on that 3-year date from when they were initially evaluated and placed, and it's time to reeval, see where they're at, see if there's been growth. Independent educational evaluation, that may be requested by a parent. It's completed by an outside agency, different from the school district. So there are evaluators out there that do this. There's agencies out there that they can seek out, go and have them evaluated. Person that's got the same skill set, same credentials do it. They just do it on the private side. They're not working within the school setting for that district. Okay. Could be general or for a specific purpose. For example, maybe assistive technology. Okay. And it's at no expense to the parent. Okay. So let's talk a bit about the initial evaluation. So before a child can actually receive those special education services or any related services for the first time, there has to be a full and individual initial evaluation to see if that child's going to qualify. It must be conducted to see if they have a disability and they're eligible. So the purpose is to determine the needs. We'll look at their present levels of academic and functional performance. And so when we do that initial assessment, we're collecting a lot of data, not only cognitively and achievement data, but we also do the adaptive behavior assessments, and that is the parent gets one and they go in and rate their student based on a lot of skills that they observe in the home setting as well as how they perform out in public. And then that teacher, a classroom teacher, will complete the same type of assessment based on the setting that they have the student in, meaning the school setting. And so we take that information as well and incorporate it into that report. We look at all that and determine what accommodations or modifications may be needed to best serve the student. Referral information becomes part of the process. Informed parent consent must be obtained before we can even evaluate them. So Debbie, you may suspect that Johnny or Susie is struggling, and you say, hey, I want to get this kid tested. We can't just take them down the hall to a room and take them in and test them. I mean, we've got to go through a process, get consent, make sure the parents are on board and in agreement before we can technically do it. No consent, no evaluation, unless the school wants due process. Okay. You've heard me mention due process, guys. You want to do everything you can to avoid it. Okay. It's not pleasant at all. That's designed. The parents will come out pretty much ahead on that every time. Okay. So you want to try to avoid that if all possible, not just regarding testing, but when you're working with those students as well. Try to work with that parent, make them an active partner in that, make sure you develop a good, strong relationship aside from the testing. Okay. You have to have a reasonable attempt to get consent at least 2 times in 2 different ways. Okay. This sometimes becomes a challenge if, depending on the home situation with the condition of the parents, or if the child's in foster care, or if that child is considered homeless. Okay, so it becomes a challenge if we're dealing with some of that information. Initially, you have 60 school days to complete the evaluation. That IEP has to be developed within 30 days of eligibility determination. So, Nate, I'm going to come in, I'm going to do the evaluation, I'm going to get all this, I'm going to prepare my report, I'm going to come in for a meeting, and I'm going to present it to the team. After I go over all the statistical information based on the assessments I gave, the team is going to discuss and look at all the data and determine whether they meet eligibility for services. Okay, have to determine if they are eligible. There are times when I sit in those meetings where it's determined by the team they're not eligible. The scores don't indicate it, the data does not, they don't meet the qualifications. Okay, so that does happen. Just because the student's tested does not mean they're going to qualify. Extensions, if the child's not available, they change district, or a parent consents in writing to an extension. This was a huge issue. I'm just going to comment on this. This became an issue back during COVID and the shutdowns.
Oh, got it.
Okay, we had to really jump through some hoops on this to make sure we were meeting some of those deadlines. And making sure we were doing our part. Okay, so I remember having to jump in and do some in our district to help out to meet the time frame, the timeline, making arrangements for a parent to bring them up while we were shut down for COVID, and doing those reevals or those initials. So there are circumstances where you can do some extensions, but I just want to mention when you have a worldwide pandemic, everything shut down, that becomes a real challenge. The eval team. So on this slide deck, there's a nice little graphic over here on the right-hand side, but who all is part of the evaluation team? So we have parents, the special education teacher, gen ed teachers. It could be more than one. If you have a self-contained, obviously it's going to be one. If they're in classes where they change and have multiple teachers, you want as many of them as possible. Building level principal, school psychologist or the psychometrist, whichever the two is doing the testing. And then others that have knowledge and testing skills, such as your speech language pathologist, um, occupational therapy, or physical therapist, or it could behavior. We've had students that my previous files downloading. I'm sorry, just kind of block the screen. We've had ABA therapists come in and they've been a part of maybe a reeval. So sometimes our autistic students are receiving ABA therapy, and so sometimes those behavior interventionists will come in. Evaluation considerations. So we look at a comprehensive evaluations in all areas of need. Okay. ELL must be addressed. English language learners has to be administered by a qualified and trained professional. Hey, not just anybody can go and administer these. They have to have extra credentialing and certifications to do it. Areas that we evaluate, areas that are looked at. We look at cognitive. We also look at communication. The younger the student, that's where your speech pathologists come in and do their evaluations. Okay, it could be a communication issue there. A lot of times those are developmental. They might have an IEP, young, beyond speech, and then as they develop, they no longer need that service. Could be motor, area motor skills, could be health related, could be educationally, could be social emotional, could be self-care. And also we have evaluations of value areas that are evaluated when we start looking at transitional services. We start talking about that when they're 14 years and older. We have to have those discussions. So if any of you guys are middle school, junior high and above, those conversations will take place when that student hits 14. You start talking about transition services. How does a parent know if someone requests an initial evaluation for their child? So that initial could be requested, recommended by a classroom teacher or a group of teachers. So once that request for the initial is made, the first thing the school needs to do is give the parent a copy of their parent rights. We call them parent safeguards. Okay, a lot of times if students been in special ed for a while, you offer that at every IEP meeting, they will probably decline it and say, I already have multiple copies of that. I don't need any more. Whenever a school gets a request for an eval, they must provide prior written notice to the parents. It describes the evaluation procedure school is wanting to do. The parents should be able to understand what the school wants to do and why. Okay, we need to make that to where it's very easy for them to understand. School must get informed written consent from the parent before we do the actual testing. So if I'm contracted out to go in, I'm not even going to show up at that school on the day they want me there unless they've already sent me a copy of the consent. I'm not going to do it. I'm expecting one tonight via email from a district that's asked me to come in and do some testing, and they know I'm not going to show up and do it until I have that consent. It's a waste of time. I can't do it unless I've got it. Okay. Okay, remember, giving consent for an initial evaluation is not the same thing as giving consent to start special education or related service. We have two different things there. Okay. I've actually seen parents deny. They may consent for the testing, get the results, and then they decide they deny it. They don't want the service. Happens. Not very often, but it's been known to happen. Okay, if the child qualifies or is evaluated and qualifies for special ed, the school asks the parent for that consent to start those services. Determining eligibility. So basically, we look at what we call a two-prong test. Now, you've heard me mention this. A lot of states now are getting away from what we call a discrepancy model, and they're going to a RTI or MTSS model, meaning there has to be a lot of interventions provided and a lot of data that's collected before you even get to the part where you're going to come in and do a formalized test. Okay. Oklahoma's in the process of going that direction right now. We're a discrepancy state. So you have very little data compared to states that do the RTI or MTSS. Very little data collected. Then we come in and do the test. Okay, so it's going to be a mindset change for everyone here in this state, and a culture shift for sure compared to what we've been doing and knowing what we're going to do. So when the evaluation's finished, we compile the information. Team should find a time to meet, decide if that child qualifies. That is the process for determining eligibility. We're going to look at all the data, all the information. The next thing, parents are included in the meeting. They should be included in all of them. Absolutely. They must give parents at least 10 calendar days before the meeting date. So remember that. Yeah, you're technically supposed to provide 10 calendar days. The team should review the results of that initial evaluation and determine if that child has a defined exceptionality and what the special education the child needs. I mentioned to you last week, I don't know if you guys, or the week before maybe, to go through and look at their criteria for qualifying for some of the different categories. And I specifically mentioned ED and how broad and vague that is. I don't know if you took the time to do that, but my comment to you was I can pretty much assure you that any of us on Zoom tonight have experienced one of the 5 criteria in the last week. Okay. But we need to look at all that information, see if they meet some of the definitions. So we look at a 2-prong test. So basically, prong 1, do they meet the definition of one of the types of exceptionalities or categories? The second prong is, and as a result of the exceptionality, do they need special education or related services? If that child meets the definition of a specific type of exceptionality, but does not need special education related services, they won't qualify. Okay, so we go and look at prong 2. If a child has a need for special education related services, but does not meet one of the definitions, they don't qualify. So there are several things that we have to look at. Okay, so understanding prong 2, the second one. Basically, the question is, how is it decided if that child needs special education or related services? Okay, by looking at the definition of special education means instruction that's specifically designed for that student. Okay, that's why we call it an individualized education plan. What IEP is. Specifically designed instruction means adapting or modifying that information, or even how it is taught or how it is presented to the student. Okay, the team may also look at and consider evaluation information. So basically, what kind of special education or related services a child needs. It may be a deal where they only need a couple really small minor things. They may not need a lot. The gap that they have in learning may not be as significant. Therefore, we may only need to modify some of their work. It may be something as simple as that, or giving them extra time. They may have some processing delays. Okay, so the team should be able to look at all that information, Christopher, and then describe the amount of support that that child needs. It's going to vary. You may have 8 kids that you serve, and all of them have different degrees of support that they need. Some of them may need a lot of one-on-one, and others may only need, Christopher, may only need monitoring only. They may only need to come to you as a resource just to get a little extra help after they've been receiving direct instruction in the regular room. So they may just need that, just a little extra support, and then others in your room may be with you a large percentage of the day.
Well, with what I'm having to deal with, I am the high school teacher, and I deal with all of them. It's a nightmare.
Yeah, so depending on what your load is and what the setup, it may be a revolving door. You may have a large number every day. So every setup is different. It's unique. It's not any of them. It's not a cookie cutter approach. So sounds like you got quite a bit. You're the man, sounds like, in your building.
You don't feel like it, but sure.
Okay. Rule outs determining eligibility. A student cannot be determined to be eligible based on the following: lack of instruction in reading, including the 5 areas: reading, phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocab, and comprehension. Lack of instruction in math, limited English proficiency. Okay, we're dealing with that very thing right now on a Spanish speaking student, and a lot of it is uh, just lack of exposure. And now that they're in English speaking school, they're young, they're really picking up. So we're dealing, had that conversation today. So if you have a child that's limited English proficiency, the materials and procedures that are used to assess them must be administered to ensure that they measure the extent to which a child has a disability and needs special education. So we have to be real careful about that. It's meant to protect that child that has maybe a different racial, cultural, or language background, so we don't misdiagnose, and that does happen quite a bit. Decisions, evaluation decisions, they have to be written. So after we look at all that information, team writes out the decision regarding how they came about qualifying the child for special services. We have a written eval report documenting that child confirmed. So basically the school psychometrist, that's what I'm bringing in. I'm bringing in a detailed report where I've taken all the data in, and it will provide a written narrative. It provides a lot of statistical information, and then at the back, there are recommendations for interventions, and there's even a recommendation on whether the child should be considered for services by the team based on the information I collected. So a copy of the report's given to the parent for free. Okay, I provide a copy for them, and then the school keeps a copy as well. All right, looking at reeval, triennial, those are, again, the 3-year reeval. What we talk about is commonly referred to as the 3-year reeval. It's done for the child that's already qualified for special ed. So, Christopher, as they're older, the ones you probably see, maybe some of them are coming up for reevals, depending on when they were tested. Testing's done to decide if they still qualify for those services. A child that's been identified with an exceptionality must be reevaluated every 3 years. Could be done more often if needed. We don't want to go in and give multiple evaluations in a year. Hey, there's some limitations on how often I would do it for a particular student. Hey, I don't want to give it multiple times in 1 year. It's not going to be valid. It's not going to be reliable. Okay, reeval is needed to decide if that child continues to meet the need for that exceptionality. Also, it shows what their strengths and weaknesses are at that point. So it's always interesting if I reeval to look at their strengths and weaknesses and then go back 3 years when they were evaluated before to see if those had changed. Also, you need to decide whether that child continues to need special ed or related services. And also if there's any changes or additions, modifications that need to be made to the existing IEP. Again, we have to get prior written notice to do the reeval. It's just not an automatic deal because it's 3 years. We have to provide that same written notice. We can't just take them in and test them. Independent eval. You may come across this. Don't know if you have yet, but you certainly may. The longer you're in this, anything can happen. Independent education evaluation. So a parent may disagree with the results of the child's eval that was done by the school site. They have the right to obtain what's known as an independent educational evaluation, or IEE. Okay, it just means that it's an evaluation conducted by a qualified examiner, the same qualifications that your school psychologist or psychometrist has. They're just simply not employed by the public school system. They're employed by an outside agency, independent agency that provides that service. If they ask for it, school must provide parents with, among other things, information about where they may obtain that. Okay. So We've had some here in this district, not a lot, but some have inquired about it. We give them options. A lot of them don't follow through with it, just kind of off the cuff. They'll ask about it, but I think I've seen it happen once where they actually brought in the outside independent eval. Who pays for it? The answer is some are at public expense and others are paid for by the parents. So public expense means the public agency, the school, Kansas City Public Schools or Wichita or wherever you're at may have to cover the full cost of that eval. Unless it's otherwise provided at no cost to the parents. Some agencies out there may provide that. It could be a family service agency that has a qualified examiner and they provide it as a service. That agency, public agency, school, may grant parents' request and pay for that independent eval, or it may initiate a hearing to show that its own evaluation was appropriate, meaning the schools. They could dispute that and say, ours is appropriate. It was done by a qualified examiner. It doesn't really say anything different. Okay, so school has the right to dispute that. Okay, some commonly asked questions, kind of getting toward the end here. Can the school end a child's qualification for special education service? Can the school just go in and say, we're stopping this service right now? No, they can't. Once that child qualifies for that special service, it can't be ended or changed without an evaluation, an IEP team meeting, and written consent. Okay, so whether or not the school thinks they need to discontinue that, they can't just say, Christopher, we're not serving Johnny Joe anymore. His grades show that he doesn't need it. We're stopping it. We can't just do that. Okay, there's a process. Can a parent stop special education services for their child? Yeah. It's called revoking consent. Parents can revoke consent for special education services in writing at any time. If that parent decides later that the child could use special education related services again, an initial evaluation needs to be done. Okay. You go back in and do another initial. If they revoke it 2 years down the road, students struggling, they decide, hey, we want to entertain the thought of then get back and receiving special services. We need to do an initial. Okay. What if there is no need for a reevaluation or the triennial or whatever you want, term you're used to using? Before doing the reeval, the parent in school will decide if a reevaluation is needed. It should be done at least once every 3 years unless the parents in school agree in writing that one is not needed. Now, that's not uncommon. I've sat in a lot of meetings through my experiences where the team agreed and it was done in writing that particular student maybe didn't need one. There could be some physical things going on. There could be a lot of things going on at home, a lot of emotional trauma and all that. And the team deemed it was in the best interest of the student not to do it at that time. Those outside factors could have a negative impact on the results that are received. So if the team agrees in writing, you don't have to do it. Okay, so again, that's not really uncommon. Here's a little kind of a flow chart showing kind of the process or the flow, going back, kind of summarizing the information that we've talked. So you have the referral, okay, be done from the parent or a referral from the teacher, and the parents been made aware of it. Then the parents' rights. Then we give prior written notice and we get prior written or parent written consent. That's day one. Then you have an initial evaluation or a reeval. It's performed and conducted. Then you have eligibility report, and you have 60 days, okay, altogether to determine from start to finish if the child's eligible or if they're not. Okay. So looking ahead this week, looking ahead at the assignment. Okay, it's a discussion board assignment on eligibility. So, topic on eligibility and placement for students. So it's a discussion board, your initial post, and then responding to at least two peers, two of your peers. So reflect and kind of answer some of the questions. Why is there such a stringent regimentation in determining eligibility and placement for special education? Okay. Why do you think there's such a stringent regimentation for determining eligibility and placement? Why do you think there's a two-pronged test for determining placement? Again, all this is in that slide deck. Just went over. Why are rule outs part of the process? Things we have to rule out. In your opinion, okay, in your opinion, does this process ensure that the appropriate students are placed in special education? Then why or why not? Why do you think that or why not? Okay, so you can kind of reflect on some of your experiences there in the district that you work in. Do you feel like that this process is ensuring that appropriate students are placed? Or you think it's allowing some of them to slip through that really probably don't need it? Okay, any questions on that? On the discussion board? Some of
Okay.
this you may have already experienced. Some of it maybe you haven't. You're going, oh man, hope I don't ever, get into that. So, Debbie, do you have a question?
Yeah, what do you mean by post your summary of the interview? Who,
You-
it says post your summary of the interview.
Basically, if you need to ask any questions of,
Okay, because
uh,
I just had a initial evaluation done today, actually.
so if you need to, um, ask, maybe your SPED director, if you haven't experienced some of this yet, which you may not have, you may be totally new to the special education classroom and
Okay,
you need to seek out some of the information, or if you, like you just had an initial and all that, and you need to reflect on that experience, by all means, provide a summary, use that to help answer
okay,
your questions.
okay.
Okay. Have all of you, or pretty much that are on tonight, have you set in a meeting where you are determining eligibility and placement? So like it was an initial on a student, you're going to sit down and review all the information and during this meeting determine eligibility. Has anybody got to experience that yet? Yes. Chris, have you?
I actually
Huh?
just came up with my first experience with uh, having to amend a student's IEP.
Okay.
Uh, Completely new experience for me. I'm brand new, so
Yeah.
amending it, and the first thing that was said to me was, "We don't want to give them too much, so we're actually going to use a para as a support first and go through the semester and then revisit it to see if they actually need to be in a modified class for that."
Yeah. So Mick brought up a point you're starting to see now. I'm seeing it more with the younger students than I am the older, but you're seeing more and more parents coming in to those meetings and throwing out a request for a one-on-one parent.
Yep. Yeah.
So, and when I talk to our people, our building administrators and special ed teachers and all that, because we have a lot of new ones too, and I always tell them that the whole goal in this is to provide the least restrictive environment. That's always something to remember. And so by considering that one-on-one, are you able to provide the least restrictive environment? So I always pose that question, and that's really the overall goal, is to provide the least restrictive environment for each of those students. But don't be shocked as you, especially if you're working with the younger students, the littles down there, this is becoming more common for those parents to come in and start asking for that. And it's hard enough finding SPED teachers and paras. And I mean, it's a lot of times that's just not even realistic. It's not in the best interest of that student either. It all goes back to least restrictive environment. So any other comment, question, feedback on your experiences? No? Okay, so that'll be due this Sunday. So coming up, so a little bit about eligibility evaluation, initial evaluation, and reeval the process. So also, guys, don't forget to respond to a couple of your peers, colleagues in this class. So that's all kind of built into the discussion board, making sure you responded at least 2 of them. Okay, do you guys have any questions between now and when that's due on Sunday? Please shoot me an email and I will get back to you as quickly as I can. And if not, I'll plan on seeing you back here on Tuesday next week. Okay. Have a good rest of the week. Hope you survive the full moon with your kids.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, guys. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
bye.
Bye.